Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the topic of asset management maturity is the key to high performance. I'm Ann Cosgrove, the editor-in-chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by Foretell Solutions. So before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items with you. Please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions via the question box in that panel. You can send your questions in at any time for the speakers, and they will be addressed after the presentation. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of that control panel. Clicking on that will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded, and you can access the question box. Additionally, if at any time you experience a technical difficulty of some sort, please send a message to us in that section, the question section, and someone will answer you privately right away. Additionally, if you're interested in continuing education credits, please note you'll receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar, and you can report to your association for CEUs. Now I'd like to introduce your speakers. We have 3 speakers today, and they are Stephen Campbell, Michael Hardy, and Scott Mellett. Stephen Campbell is with the Washington, D.C. Department of General Services, where he is Senior Planning Officer. He's a skilled capital project manager with a career that includes his own architecture firm in New York City, public service with the NYC Department of Design and Construction, and strategic planning projects in the Middle East. In 2008, after returning to the U.S., Stephen re-entered public service, this time in Washington, D.C.'s Office of Property Management. And upon the creation of the D.C. DGS, he served a year as Deputy Director for the Construction Division. He was then selected to create the planning office of the Department of General Services. So as part of its work now, DGS Planning is involved in transforming industrial sites into sustainable public works facilities, upgrading district office space into creative communities, increasing awareness for co-locating of multiple municipal needs, and increasing economic development opportunities in district facilities and properties. Stephen's department also administers facility condition assessments and is involved in urban agriculture, public safety, and municipal facility master planning. So you'll hear from him today. That's some of his work. Michael Hardy is Vice President of Public Sector Work at Foretell Solutions, and he has more than 20 years of experience helping customers take advantage of innovative technologies to empower informed decision-making and to achieve their financial and organizational goals. Michael's experience includes more than 15 years serving the federal government sector and 10 years focused on physical asset and facility management. He's a senior fellow at the Asset Leadership Network, promoting the principles of the ISO 55000 Management System Standard for asset management among state and local governments. And Scott Mellett will join us today also. He's Vice President of Sales at Foretell Solutions, and Scott has worked in multiple industries and has an extensive background with private enterprise and public sector clients located throughout North America, South America, and Europe. His merger and acquisition experience includes both the buy side and sell side of multiple acquisitions and carve-outs. So we will hear from these 3 gentlemen today. We'll learn about asset management, and we'll look forward to taking your questions at the end. I'll hand it over to you, Scott. How are you today?
Great, Ann. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the introduction. And also thank you to everyone that has joined us here today, and we'll go ahead and get started. And so I was at a conference about a month ago, and one of the speakers said, an interesting quote, which was, if you get asset management right, you get it all right. And it really got me thinking, right? And so, Michael, with that in mind, what do we mean when we say asset management maturity?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. The term really is used to acknowledge that asset management is a journey, not a destination. And every organization is somewhere along that path. Whether they recognize it or not is another story. So some examples are the Institute for Asset Management uses a 6-level scale that they start with innocence at kind of level 0, and it concludes with excellence. So you see there's a journey that's involved there. Others follow a structure like CMMI, which calls level 1 chaotic, and level 5 is optimizing. So regardless of how you label the waypoints on the journey, it's important to know really is where are you today, and do you have a plan for where you want to be next year, 5 years from now, or 10 years after that? So essentially kind of growing up or achieving some maturity. The reason that we're claiming asset management maturity is the key to high performance, as in our title today. is because asset management rests on these four fundamental principles of ISO 55000. They're value, alignment, leadership, and assurance. And when you get those things right, truly, you get it right for the whole organization. But we'll talk more about those later on in the webinar.
All right, so it sounds, Michael, like it's really a journey, and that's what we mean by maturity, is that it's a journey that we're all going to go on together, and I'm sure everybody out there listening can relate to that, right? That's been doing this for quite a while. So Michael, on another topic I hear frequently is the difference between asset management and managing assets. Help us understand, what do we really mean by that?
Yeah, so the big difference between those two things is not just the arrangement of the words, really. The difference is context. So I'm going to go way out on a limb and say that nobody listening to the webinar today thinks that the problems we have with things like deferred maintenance or asset reliability or crumbling public infrastructure are due to a lack of knowledge. We know how to manage assets. That's not the problem. In fact, we learn it early, right? Every kid with a bike learns that run to failure increases risk, maybe to your head or your knees. And we're all told that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So it begs the question, why aren't maintenance budgets bigger? And why don't we prioritize things like capital renewal projects over new construction and ribbon cuttings? I believe the reason for that is that most organizations have not embraced the why of asset management. So ISO 55000 defines asset management as, and this is a quote, the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets. So embracing the why means seeing assets as a source of value to be realized rather than a cost which has to be avoided. So high performance organizations nurture this coordinated activity by building bridges that connect operations, planning and finance, and aligns asset management with the mission of the organization. There's a lot more to say about this, and lots of people have written on this concept. In fact, there's the ISO TC 251. They published an excellent article a couple of years ago called Managing Assets in the Context of Asset Management. And I'll put a link to that I'll put a link to that article in the presentation notes for anyone who's interested to read more.
All right, that's some interesting points, Mike. I appreciate that, and I know also a big component of this is sort of asset leadership and taking ownership of trying to bring all these groups together. And so, Stephen, on that topic of leadership, DGS has a large and really diverse portfolio of assets. How have you become an asset leader within the city?
Thank you very much for asking that question and for having us here today. I look at leadership as the primary support for being able to make some of these things happen. Following along with what Mike had just said, we as asset leaders, we as facilities managers need to make it clear why it's important to those leaders who make the budget and the capital improvement decisions, why these things are important. Who is it actually serving? And why is a better facility or a better asset serving that clientele or serving the needs of the district or of the municipality much better? We need to make it really clear why it's important to the leadership for their success, for them to be viewed as successful. But it also means that we as the internal leaders have to be the conduit between that facility. We have to advocate for that facility and for the clients that use it to that leadership. Why do we need to spend these kinds of dollars to be able to do it? I think of us then as the champions for that facility. I even like to think of us as Prometheus, the bringer of light to the other leaders, to make it clear why our buildings are important, why spending this kind of money at this time in this area of the facility is important.
I like the Prometheus example, Stephen. I'm going to have to remember that one. And along that line, so many of the executives I speak with, they talk about the problems they have getting finance to understand their needs. One guy said to me once, the bean counters think of me just as a black hole of money, right? And I'm sure we can relate to that. And it sounds like there needs to be a bridge between asset managers who are caring for the assets and the finance office where long-term capital planning is done. Stephen, could you talk about some of the challenges you faced early on at DGS?
Yes, and they're many and varied, but the two fundamental differences are that generally facility managers are looking in the short term. What has to happen so that I can fix the facility so it continues to operate? What kind of Band-Aid do I need to put on it, or what piece of equipment needs to be replaced so it continues to operate right now? So the budget people and the capital planning people are looking at a significantly longer horizon. In DC, we're looking at a 20-year planning horizon where funds are capital eligible if it's a 20-plus year investment. So thinking about the facility maintenance needs, which are getting us through this season or through the next 2 or 3 seasons, is almost counterintuitive to the capital planning mindset. It means, though, that in order to best utilize that asset, we need to think about the operations dollars, which are in the short term, being used judiciously and pointing to those things that would more likely fail and reduce the extended life of the facility. And therefore, we focus on the facilities dollars or the short-term dollars, making that capital asset operate significantly longer. What this really depends on, and what my biggest challenges have been in this regard, are ensuring that we've got consistency of data as well as current data, not data that was collected 6 or 7 years ago, but data that is updated as we do new capital improvements, making sure that that data is current, making sure that we're budgeting accurately. If we misdiagnose or indicate the wrong budget numbers, even for facilities maintenance, it calls into question many of our other assumptions. So consistent budget data and clear budget data is very, very important. And last, but certainly not least, there are often changing political or client agency priorities in our case. And those political priorities may have to do with the latest headline, with changes in direction of a client agency's needs, or the new enhancements that education or healthcare might be looking at. And so the political priorities change, and we need to be just as flexible and agile in setting our facilities budgets, as well as ensuring that the data that we're collecting consistently reflects those changes, as well as whatever the past was.
Right. And so, Michael, are you seeing similar patterns in other organizations as well?
Oh, yeah, I sure do. In fact, our customer at National Park Service, it's really just one example, but I mean, they've been a leader in this kind of data-driven asset management for well more than 20 years, and as a big leader within Department of Interior. But quite recently, they've come to recognize that their old approach is really not achieving the results that they had hoped for, and they're right now pioneering a bunch of new methods for developing data and performing assessments, modeling new performance metrics, and even how they communicate their project needs to DOI and to Congress. So for them, bridging this gap to finance is in some ways about, finding a new way to communicate, and then to Stephen's point, having a real agreement on the information that's being used for decision making is really critical. And frankly, I think this is happening in lots of other places as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm seeing the same thing as well, and I think we're starting to dig deeper into what we like to call strategic asset management, right? And this is when you have different stakeholders. Each stakeholder has a competing priority. They each have their own set of data. When it's time for planning, there's emails and spreadsheets flying around all over the place. And at the end of it all, right, there's still never enough money to go around. So Stephen, how do you work together at DGS to sort of manage this problem?
Some of the things that you mentioned are some of our biggest challenges. It is definitely the case that in our various divisions, we might the capital construction division may have a different gross square footage number than our portfolio division does, than our facilities management division does. It's all for the same facility, but because everyone has their different spreadsheets or looks at the building in a different way, they have different data. Part of what we're doing is we've developed a data user group, and we recognize the need for a common data to make sure we have clarity about which piece of data is the data of record, what is the source of that data, how do we ensure the qualitative aspect of that data, and ensure that the different other divisions that use the data agree or concur that that data is the data of record. We need to develop not only the common data, but a common vocabulary. Even between facilities and capital construction, they may use the same term slightly differently. We need transparency and clarity about what we mean when we use certain words, and we want to be able to look at the data from a common view, to be able to see it exactly the same way as others see it. We want it to be visually easy to understand. Different people learn things in different ways, but visually we want to be able to all see the same thing in exactly the same way. We may have to finesse or sort the data differently, but we need to be able to see it in the same way. But each of the members of the team, whether you're capital construction, facilities, or portfolio, the data also needs to be tailored to their specific understanding. Even though it's the same data and a common vocabulary, we need to make sure that it's understood the way portfolio manager understands it, where they're dealing with leasing of the space. Capital construction deals with it differently as designing and constructing the space, and facilities management may deal with it as maintaining the space. So it's all still the same facility, but we're looking at it from all different points of view.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have a big need for collaboration. And I'd like to take that to another level and talk a little bit specifically about the facility managers. And Stephen, how do you work with the FM division at DGS? Like, how are they involved in the strategic planning?
I think the way that we deal with facilities management and strategic planning is they are one of the primary users of not only the data, but of the facility itself. Their last work order is the new existing condition that we're using to do capital planning. So instead of doing assessments every 6 years, we've developed a process where the closeout of any work order, whether it's a facility maintenance work order or a small capital project or even a major modernization, the data needs to go into our asset management system as soon as that work order is completed, so that we have current information about the facility. We certainly invite facilities management to be part of the capital planning process, but more by ensuring that they have the tools necessary to keep the facilities in good working order, and the data current is the way that their maintaining of our facilities becomes the core of our capital planning.
All right, Stephen, that's great advice for facility managers. And so at this point, we've covered quite a bit of ground, and I think it's clear we all realize we have work to do on our asset management journey and as we go along this path. At this point, a common question that we hear is sort of the, where do I get started, or how do I make that first move on this journey? And we've all heard a lot about ISO 55000. And I know for most, it seems like a daunting task, and a lot of us believe that, I don't have the resources for such an undertaking. Michael, could you talk a little bit about the benefits of ISO 55000 and how it can help someone get started?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics. So I think just kind of way to summarize this and talk more about the journey is I'll try to expand on a few ideas that we've brought up since really the beginning here. So first of all, like this journey from innocence to excellence, if you will, and then where you go from there, it really requires a roadmap. So ISO 55000 is a great roadmap that can help any organization understand where to begin their journey, help figure out where they want to go, and even how to plan that trip. So getting started on this journey will force you and your team, if you're listening today and wanting to take away some advice, it'll force you to have to answer some important questions. These questions support the why of asset management first, and that makes all of the how questions so much easier. And if you start with the how, nobody will ever get back to the why, and the how will make no sense. So, and I think this is a good place, Scott, to interject that people always seem to be concerned about certification in ISO 55000. And for most organizations, the journey will not lead to certification, and that's totally okay. So building your assessment management program using the principles of ISO 55000 is where your organization will find value and improve performance. Certification for your program is a separate business decision. Every organization has to consider that based on their needs, their industry, and even an understanding of the return on investment that might make possible.
All right, thank you, Michael. That's a great summary, and I think it's important, right, that you don't have to get certified, right, but it is a great framework that's out there that's available to be used. So thank you, Michael, and thank you, Stephen, for a great conversation here today on asset management maturity. At this point, I just want to kind of review some of the key takeaways that we've talked about today, and a need to process but keep it simple, right? And I think that's one of the key takeaways, and that we need leadership, and we need to get everyone working together and everyone involved is another key point. And then, Stephen, you hit on having a single source of truth at DC has been a great aid in gathering all of your data so that everyone's speaking the same language. And then finally, make sure everyone is involved, right? I think that is another key component of this. So there's leadership issues, it's getting everyone involved. And again, thank you everybody for participating today. At this point,
hey,
we're going to open it up to.
Before you head up to questions, I was going through your summary here. I think there's one last thing to say on the topic.
Sure.
And it reminds me, I just reminded my friend Jim Dieter, who is the CEO of the Asset Leadership Network. He likes to say that everything in ISO 55000 is just common sense, and to tell people that they're probably doing a lot of it already. So it may seem mysterious, but ISO 55000 just provides this useful framework upon which you can build your asset management program. So don't be intimidated by this standard. Keep it simple, get started, and then keep improving. That's all there is to it. And my last thing to say to everybody listening today is you can do this.
Absolutely, and that's why my quote here is, it always seems impossible until it is done, right? And nothing could be truer. Absolutely. So again, everyone, thank you for listening today. And at this point now, we'll turn it over to Anne, who will go through the audience questions.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. And thank you to our audience for sending in your questions. Yes, we'll jump right into it. Let's see. So, Stephen, we have a question directed to you first. And I believe it has to do with when you were talking about when the facilities maintenance team or others enter information into the system. But I'll read it verbatim. It says, when a project or work order completes, what specifically happens in your capital planning system and to what effect? So what's that process like once they put in that work order or project data into your system?
Very good question. So basically the repair or the thing that had to be adjusted, whether it's a capital improvement or a facilities management repair, was something that had previously been identified as a deficiency or as something that still needed to be addressed. Once it is, that thing that needs to be addressed becomes the basis for the work order in question. And when you're finished with that work order, whether it's replacing an air handling unit or repairing a roof, that at the end, at the closeout process, partly as a condition of getting that payment, the data goes back up saying that this thing which was previously a deficiency is now a new asset or a repaired asset with a new remaining useful life.
Okay, thank you. So what tools do you use to update your management database after a work order is complete? Staying in that same vein, what do you use to update it after that work order is complete? How do you address that?
Well, the DGS, Department of General Services, is utilizing the Fortel Solutions data asset management application. When we do our facility condition assessments, all that data goes in there. We have independent assessors who can assess either entire facilities or different assets. So we have people who can do low-level energy audits or just roof repair, roof assessments, and that data can all go into this coordinated asset management application.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like there's, you had talked about, I have another question about specific projects and something along that, getting the message across. You had talked about that earlier, and we're still talking about that here where there's multiple stakeholders. Everyone on the call understands that too in terms of asset management and facility management overall. There's many stakeholders. So you had talked about that, getting the message across to the finance department, for instance. So I'd actually like to ask you, what is an example of a project, large or small, of when you were able to, successfully get the message across to finance about the need for money for an asset or a project? Did your data help you do that? I was just kind of looking for some type of standout example where you realized, hey, this is working.
So I think it's a very mixed kind of a question. Generally speaking, the projects are established either by a client agency deciding that they've got a deficiency or a problem that needs to be addressed, or we in capital construction deciding that the facility is not meeting a certain standard. It's often very haphazard what the priorities are. With an asset management application, we can compare all the apples to all apples instead of apples to oranges. So we can see where are all of our roofs that are less than optimal, that have less than a 5-year remaining useful life. And rather than saying facility X versus facility Y, cherry picking, we can say that our goal is to establish facilities that are all in either fair or good condition rather than all over the place. It establishes a standard for us. And our biggest way that we're applying this right now is in our schools. We have not only improved the condition of our facilities, we have huge major modernizations so that many of our school buildings are in excellent shape. But when there are complaints either from principals or from parents about the condition of a building, we have empirical data that shows what aspect of the physical asset is contributing to that perception. and we can compare, like I say, compare apples to apples across other buildings, other schools of a similar size or a similar age, or a similar types, like elementary schools versus senior high schools. But it suddenly allows us to slice and dice however we choose and however we need to respond to the issues or questions raised by the clients.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And it looks like we have time for one more question. And I'll put it out to you, Stephen, as well as Michael or Scott, if you'd like to answer, with your experience as well out in the field. And the question is, I'll direct you first, Stephen, is what are some of the typical reasons leadership at DGS might resist making asset management a focus for the organization, perhaps in your past experience, before you implemented this? And what techniques did you use to change their minds? And of course, opening that up to Stephen and Michael as well. Sorry, Scott and Michael as well.
So I'll just jump in really quickly. I think the biggest challenge is always, do we have sufficient funding to address the problem that has arisen? Having better data available makes it clear not only what the likely costs are at this moment, but how the costs may increase if this problem is deferred by 1 or 2 years, or by 5 years or 10 years. And when you're talking about avoided costs, especially when you're talking about capital planning and capital improvements, that rings out loud and clear. It's the easiest way to be able to make your case if you can talk about avoided costs, whether operations costs or capital costs.
Yeah, and I would add a little different viewpoint, I guess, to what I've seen with the District of Columbia, certainly the last few years there. So Stephen's work with the Department of General Services is quite closely coupled these days with the work that's being done in the Office of the CFO. And so Jeff DeWitt is the CFO in the district, and he and the folks that work in his office, David Clark and Daryl Street, all these folks are just doing a tremendous amount of work to understand the long-term capital planning needs, which has helped everything from their recover their bond rating to managing assets of all kinds of different types in a way that I don't think very many cities have really sort of dared to do yet. And this close collaboration with DGS has has a technical aspect in that the Fortel system is connected to their office and provides data to their data warehouse. But also I see this cooperation and support that really was, we talked about a bridge earlier. You can really sort of see the bridge in DC because of the cooperation that goes on there. It's extremely encouraging to see, and I hope will be replicated in lots of places.
Thank you, Michael, for that. So with that, we'll close it out. I do thank everyone for sending in their questions, and Stephen, Michael, and Scott, thank you for the presentation today. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, indeed.
We also want to thank Fortel Solutions for sponsoring the webinar, and a recording of the webinar will be available online at facilityexecutive.com. And also please check out fortelsolutions.com. That's the number 4, telsolutions.com. And to find out more about the offering and what they've been doing with some of their clients and what you might be able to do. Just as a final note, we want to let you know about an event that Facility Executive Magazine hosts, and registration is now open. That's Facility Executive Live, September 19th, 2019. We're in Arlington, Virginia this year. So if you check out facilityexecutivelive.com, you can find out more. So again, thank you, everyone. Thanks to Fortel Solutions, and have a great afternoon.